Mark had been looking forward to a quiet evening. The week had been long, the house too silent. And lately, the distance between him and Claire had grown heavier than either of them cared to admit. But when she came home that night, something about her seemed different. A glow in her face, a subtle spark in her eyes. She kicked her shoes off in the corner, disappeared into the bathroom, and stayed there for almost an hour. He could hear the faint hum of a hairdryer, the click of makeup cases, the soft shuffle of hangers. Mark stirred the pot on the stove and thought to himself that maybe, just maybe, she was doing this for him. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe the tired routine that had dulled their marriage could be shaken off. If only for an evening. By the time she walked into the dining room, she looked like she was stepping out for a celebration. He smiled to himself, warmed by the thought that perhaps she still wanted to impress him. They sat down together, plates full, wine glasses half raised. At first, the silence between them was the familiar kind, quiet, born, not of hostility, but of exhaustion. Mark chewed slowly, watching her with the hopeful eye of a husband longing for something to shift. Something to remind him of the woman he once knew so well. Claire was the one who finally broke the silence. She began with casual talk about her day, about the office, and the changes swirling around her department. There was talk of restructuring, of layoffs, of new goals being handed down from the top. She spoke with the practiced ease of someone who had rehearsed her words, her fork tapping lightly against her plate. Mark listened closely, nodding when needed, trying to keep up with the thread of her story. But then she mentioned David, her boss, the man in charge of the promotions everyone was fighting for. The man who, she said, didn't show favoritism openly, but had a way of being selective with certain people. Mark's hand paused midair, fork suspended. Though he said nothing, Claire set her utensils down, looked at him directly, and her voice carried the weight of someone about to reveal something heavy. "I've made a decision," she said. "It might sound crazy at first, but it's strategic, rational, even selfless." Mark frowned slightly, his chest tightening. Though he remained still, she went on, steady, almost clinical in tone, as if she were presenting a business proposal rather than opening her soul. "On Friday, after work, David invited me to a hotel, and I accepted." The words landed like cold steel in Mark's chest. For a moment, the sounds of the room seemed to vanish. Only her voice remained, echoing inside his head. She continued, her tone unwavering. "It will be a one-time thing. Nothing emotional. No strings. No consequences. I'm doing this for us, Mark. To secure our stability, to get the promotion I've been working toward for years. One night to change everything." Mark stared at her, eyes fixed on the woman he thought he knew, the woman he had once dreamed of building a lifetime with. His stomach churned. His hands gripped the stem of his wine glass tighter than he realized. Inside, his world was crumbling, but outwardly, he remained still. Claire leaned back, waiting for his reaction. Maybe she expected rage, maybe tears, maybe an explosion that would prove to her how serious her decision was. Instead, she found only silence. Mark lifted his glass, swirled the wine gently, and finished it in one steady drink. He placed it down without a sound, his face unreadable. He managed a single nod, as though acknowledging her words without granting them power. She mistook his calm for understanding. "I thought it was better to be honest. Better to tell you up front rather than hide it. You're mature enough to understand. Aren't you? It's just sex, Mark. Nothing more. It's not betrayal, it's strategy." But inside him, the ground shifted. Each phrase pierced deeper. "It's just one night. It's for us. It's just sex." Her words were nails driven into the heart of everything they had built together. He sat there in silence, his mind spinning, his chest tight, his breath shallow. He could not find the woman he once loved in the face across from him. All he saw was someone who had already crossed a line she would never be able to return from. The dinner cooled between them, forgotten. The food lost its taste. The room felt colder with every second that passed. Claire, convinced she had lifted a weight off her shoulders, ate calmly, as if she believed the storm had already passed. But for Mark, it was only just beginning. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He did not plead. He sat still in the silence. And in that silence, he realized something undeniable. The man who had walked into this dinner was not the same man who would leave it. Inside, something broke, but something else was born. That night, the house was quiet. But inside Mark's chest, storms raged. He lay on his side, watching Claire breathe in the rhythm of sleep. Her face was soft, untroubled, as if nothing heavy weighed on her conscience. She had confessed what she believed was honesty, and then, without hesitation, slipped beneath the blankets, as if the world hadn't shifted forever. Mark did not move. He did not close his eyes. He studied her like a man staring at a stranger, a woman he used to know, now wrapped in betrayal she thought was logic. The words replayed in his mind, over and over. It's just one night. It's for us. It's just sex. Each repetition was a knife turned deeper, not because of the act itself, but because of the coldness with which she spoke. Not remorseful, not ashamed, only convinced. And in that silence, Mark understood something with a clarity sharper than any scream could bring. Some betrayals do not need shouting. They scream on their own. By the sheer absurdity of their existence, he could have shaken her awake, demanded an explanation, pleaded for her to see the madness in her plan, but he did not. He could have shouted, cursed, unleashed the hurt that burned in his chest, but he did not, because he realized that nothing he could say would undo the choice she had already made. Her decision had not been born that night, it had been nurtured in secret, prepared long before the words ever left her lips. So he lay still, his breathing steady, his eyes unblinking. And while she dreamed of tomorrow, he began to dream of something else. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness, but clarity. For years, Mark had thought strength meant patience, that love meant endurance, that silence meant peace. But in that bed, with the woman who had just declared the future price of their marriage, he learned a new definition. Strength, he realized, was not in tolerating betrayal. It was in knowing how to respond without losing yourself. The hours dragged, each one heavier than the last. The clock ticked in the background, steady and merciless. He thought of the years invested, the sacrifices made, the promises whispered in the dark. And then he thought of how easily she had traded them for a single night in a hotel. His heart hardened, not with hatred, but with resolve. If she saw their marriage as a transaction, then he would treat it like one too. He would not shout or beg or cry. He would plan. He would wait. He would strike when the moment was right. Not in rage, but with precision. By dawn, his decision was sealed. He would not stop her from walking into betrayal. He would let her. He would watch. He would record. And when the truth could no longer be denied, he would ensure the weight of her choices crashed down on her shoulders alone. Mark slipped out of bed as the first light crept into the room. Claire stirred slightly, unaware that the man beside her was no longer the same man she had married. He brewed the morning coffee, set it quietly on the table, as he had always done, and looked around the house one last time with the eyes of a man who now saw everything differently, because from this moment forward, nothing was the same. The husband who once endured had died in silence that night. In his place rose a man who would not fight with words, but with evidence, strategy, and patience. And Claire, still lost in dreams, had no idea the war she had started, nor the calm, calculated storm she had awakened beside her. Morning came like any other, but Mark no longer moved through life the same way. He was steady, deliberate, calm in a way that only men who have already died to their illusions can be. The man who brewed coffee, kissed his wife, and watched her leave for work was not the same man who had heard her betrayal the night before. When Claire's shower ran and steam filled the hall, Mark slipped into the bedroom. On the dresser sat her purse, carelessly left open. He reached into the drawer and pulled out the tool he had purchased days earlier. Long before she had admitted the truth, perhaps part of him had sensed it all along. A device small enough to hide in the seam of her handbag, quiet enough to betray every secret she thought was safe. With careful hands, he placed it deep inside, tucked away where it would never be noticed. When she walked out the door, dressed for another day at the office, She carried with her the very evidence that would one day expose her. She thought she was leaving behind a husband who understood, who had swallowed his pride. What she didn't know was that every step she took was already being recorded. By mid-morning, Mark sat in his car outside the office, phone in hand, listening to the faint hum of her world through the tiny microphone. At first, it was the usual sounds: typing, footsteps, casual chatter. But then, a voice he recognized cut through the noise. David. Smooth. Confident. Stepping into her office with the arrogance of a man who thought he could own whatever he wanted. "Friday night," he said, his tone low but firm. "Everything's still good?" "Right." Claire's voice came. Steady. Without hesitation. "Already booked. Rooms waiting." Mark gripped the phone tighter, jaw clenched. And then came the sound he had both dreaded and expected: the faint press of lips, the shuffle of a chair, the quickened breath of a woman who had already sold her loyalty. That was all he needed. Proof. Undeniable and raw. But Mark wasn't done. Evidence alone was not enough. Betrayal must be witnessed, not just whispered. That was when he made the call. He scrolled to the number he had saved days earlier, the one he had pulled from Claire's phone when she wasn't looking. It belonged to Sarah, David's wife. They had never spoken before. But betrayal has a way of uniting strangers. The line rang. A woman's voice answered. Cold. Guarded. "Hello." Mark introduced himself with calm precision. He explained who he was, who she was, and what tied their lives together in this ugly knot. He told her about the hotel, the reservation, the plans her husband had made with his wife. He told her about the microphone, the recordings, the kisses. Every word was delivered without rage, without flourish, just the truth, sharp and undeniable. On the other end, silence, heavy, suffocating silence. Then, a crack of fury in her voice. "In the act? You're telling me they're meeting in a hotel room?" "Yes." Mark said simply. "Friday. The Monarch Hotel, room 1508, 8 o'clock. I'll send you the details." There was no hesitation in Sarah's response. Only fire. "Then I'll be there. And I'll film everything." He thinks he's clever, but he has no idea what's coming. Mark ended the call, his heart steady. He had no need to shout, no need to curse. The trap was set, and the alliance was formed. Two betrayed spoos, united not by love, but by the cold determination to expose what had been hidden. And so the clock began to tick. Each hour drew them closer to the moment when secrets would be dragged into the light, and neither Claire nor David would ever again be able to pretend that betrayal was just business, just strategy, just one night, because soon, the whole world would see it for what it really was. Friday night arrived with the kind of stillness that masks approaching storms. Claire stood before the mirror, draped in elegance, her hair falling just right, her perfume heavy in the air. She told Mark it was a private work event, nothing that required his presence. He offered no argument. Instead, he smiled, opened the door for her like a gentleman, and wished her a good evening. She mistook his composure for approval. She didn't notice the quiet triumph behind his eyes. Once she was gone, Mark pulled out his phone and tapped the app that linked to the hidden microphone. A faint hum filled his ear. He heard her heels strike the lobby marble, her voice at the reception desk, the rustle of papers, the elevator's mechanical groan, and then, a final click, the lock of room 1508. Inside, her voice shifted into something lighter. Expectant, she spoke to herself in half whispers as she unpacked her nerves along with her purse. Mark sat still, listening, every sound confirming the truth he already knew. Moments later, another voice entered, the confident tone of David. Smooth, familiar, smug. The door shut behind him. Laughter spilled into the air, followed by the shuffle of footsteps and the unmistakable rhythm of kisses. Through the tiny device, Mark heard the promises. After tonight, the position is yours. You'll be moving up. This will be good for both of us. Claire's answering breath was unsteady but eager. Intoxicated not with love, but with ambition. Mark didn't flinch. His heart beat slow, steady. He had no need to burst into that room himself, because someone else was already waiting down the hall. In room 1506, Sarah sat with her phone fully charged, her heart a furnace of betrayal. She had listened to Mark's words, seen the details he sent, and chosen her role. She wasn't going to imagine her husband's betrayal. She was going to capture it, raw and unfiltered, for the world to see. She waited until the noises from the next room grew careless, until laughter rose and voices tangled with sheets. Then she stood, phone recording, and crossed the hall. Her knuckles struck the wood. 3 sharp knocks, inside. The sound of motion froze. A pause thick with panic. Claire's voice cracked through the silence, asking who it was. David moved toward the door, slower, uncertain, and then, through the peephole, the truth stared back at them. Sarah's voice cut through the walls. Open this door. David, I know you're in there, and I know who's with you. The latch turned. The door opened. Sarah stormed in. Camera raised, capturing everything: the bed, the tangled sheets, the woman scrambling to cover herself. David stood frozen, caught between denial and shame. And Claire, the wife who had called betrayal strategy, now cowered beneath the glare of a woman who had nothing left to lose. Sarah's words were knives. This is your promotion. Claire sleeping with my husband. This is how you climb, Claire stammered, reaching for excuses. But Sarah didn't allow them. She swung the camera across the room, recording every angle, every ounce of disgrace. Then, without another word, she pressed send. The video shot straight to the company's board of directors, uncut, undeniable, irreversible. Mark heard it all through the device. He didn't cheer, didn't laugh. He simply sat in the silence that followed, knowing the trap had snapped shut. The evidence was no longer his secret. It was out in the open, impossible to bury. What began as whispers in the dark was now a scandal with a life of its own. Claire and David thought they were securing a future. Instead, they had just destroyed it. As the storm raged inside room 1508 of the Monarch Hotel, Mark sat at home in silence, his hands steady, his heart unshaken. He didn't need to raise his voice, didn't need to expose himself to the chaos. The trap was already sprung. Now came the part he had been preparing in secret: the counterattack. On his desk lay a folder marked with his name alone. Inside were documents meticulously arranged: bank records, account numbers, divorce petitions. Everything that needed to be done had already been mapped out. All that remained was to pull the trigger. With a single tap, he opened the banking app on his phone. The screen glowed, showing balances once shared. He moved his finger slowly, deliberately, transferring every dollar into the new account he had opened in his name alone. Seconds later, the joint account drained to zero. Claire's financial lifeline was cut, her access erased. Next came the cards. He scrolled to the list of active accounts, one by one canceling them, his expression calm, almost serene. Each cancellation was another door closing, another reminder that the woman who thought she could gamble with loyalty would find herself penniless in the aftermath. Then, the house. Mark pulled up the smart lock app. With a few keystrokes, the code that once opened their shared home vanished. A new code was entered, one known only to him. What had been their house only hours ago was now his alone. And finally, the papers. On the table lay the envelope, sealed and waiting. Divorce. Signed and dated. Prepared in advance, like a soldier laying out his weapons before the battle. He didn't need a confrontation. He needed only to let reality speak louder than words. By the time Claire stepped out of the hotel, her dress wrinkled, her dignity shattered, her future already crumbling. Mark's world had been reset. While she fought to explain herself to Sarah, while whispers turned into video evidence spreading through inboxes at her company, Mark was already ahead of her, moving with precision. Hours later, the garage door opened. Her car pulled in slowly, headlights cutting through the dark. She walked up to the front door, heels clicking against the concrete, her breath sharp with nerves. She typed in the code she had always known. But the keypad blinked red. Denied. She tried again. Faster. Her voice rising in panic. Again. Denied. She knocked, calling his name. The sound carried through the door. But Mark remained calm on the other side, He didn't open. He didn't argue. He didn't allow her inside. Instead, he slid the envelope under the door. The papers glided across the floor, crisp and final. His voice, firm but controlled, broke the silence. These are the divorce papers. Your bags are in the garage. You reap what you sow. On the other side, she froze. Her hands trembled as she picked up the envelope, tore it open, and stared at the signed documents. Her world tilted. Everything had been prepared in advance: the transfer, the locks, the signatures. He had been ready for this night long before she walked out in her elegant dress. She called his name again, pleading now, her voice thin, breaking. But Mark stayed silent. The man she had once known was gone. In his place stood a man who had chosen clarity over chaos, dignity over rage, and so she walked to the garage, her eyes burning, her hands shaking. There she found the suitcases, neatly stacked clothes, shoes, the remnants of a life she thought she controlled. She carried them back to her car with no place left to go, the echo of his words still haunting her. You reap what you sow. And in that moment, Claire understood that her one night of ambition had cost her everything. Claire drove back to the Monarch Hotel with trembling hands, her heart pounding as if speed alone could undo the damage. The house was no longer hers. The husband she dismissed had locked her out. But surely, she thought, David would be waiting. Surely he would comfort her, remind her this was all for their future, not ruin. She knocked softly, then harder, until the door creaked open. David sat on the edge of the bed, his face pale, his phone in hand. He didn't look up right away. When he did, his eyes carried no warmth, no promise. The board has the video, he said flatly. The CEO called. We're both fired. Claire's breath caught in her throat. She tried to speak, but he went on, his voice sharp, stripped of pretense. My wife's divorcing me. My career is finished. And you? He paused, his gaze cutting into her like a blade. You ruined everything. Get out. The words fell like a final verdict. There was no softness, no alliance left between them. Whatever illusion of power Claire thought she held had evaporated. She tried one last time, her voice cracking. Can I stay here tonight? David let out a humorless laugh, empty of compassion. No. Leave. With nothing left to say, she gathered her bags once more and stepped into the night, jobless, abandoned, humiliated. The future she had gambled everything for had turned to ash in her hands. Claire walked away from the hotel with no destination, no allies, and no dignity, only the crushing weight of choices she could never take back. In the quiet that followed, Mark didn't feel rage. He didn't feel triumph. What filled him instead was clarity. Betrayal doesn't just break a man, it remakes him. It strips away illusions. It tears down the walls of comfort. And it forces the truth into the light. Claire thought she was playing a game. That one night could be traded for ambition. That loyalty could be bent without consequence. But she forgot that every game has rules. And every move leaves a mark. Mark never raised his voice. He never raised a hand. He didn't need to. He simply let betrayal consume itself, until the very thing she believed would lift her up became the weight that dragged her under. In the end, she was left with nothing but the ruins of her own choices. While Mark walked away not broken, but remade stronger, clearer, and free. And so, I ask you men, if you were Mark, would you have let her go through with it or stopped her before? Share your thoughts below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more true stories of betrayal and justice.